Welcome everyone to Authors on the Air. I'm your host, Pam Stack. I'm also your book junkie, cat wrangler. I hope that you're here to see my next fabulous guest, Cadwell Turnbull. Cadwell, welcome to Authors on the Air. I'm thrilled that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so happy. Cadwell's new book is called No Gods, No Monsters. It is an amazing bit of writing in the fantasy genre, but not the kind of fantasy that I'm used to reading. Cadwell, what I noticed about your book is that you take present day situations and address them using the fantasy genre. Start from the beginning and tell me about your writing path, will you please?
My writing path. What's the beginning? Okay, so I could go way back. I could talk about, elementary school. Where do you want me to begin?
Where do you want to begin? Where did your path to writing, your desire to write come from?
Okay. So, when I was a kid, I thought I wanted to be a scientist, and I think the reason why I thought that was the right profession for me was because I was just interested in how the world worked. I was curious. And so I thought that up until 8th grade. And what happened was one of my English teacher, Mrs. Jones, assigned us to read Anne Frank, The Diary of Anne Frank, and write an essay about it. And at the time, I didn't know how big and important that book was. So I, procrastinated on it. I didn't read it until like maybe the weekend before it was due. And then I read it, and it gutted me. It floored me. I had never read anything like that before. And so it opened up this kind of, well inside of me. And I poured all of that into the essay I wrote. I just let my feelings go. And I, submitted that essay to my teacher, and, she looked at it and she kind of pulled me aside and she was like, have you ever considered, being a writer? This is the truth. This is the truth. And I was like, no. But after she said that, and she was like, this is a really great essay. I think you could pursue this. I couldn't get it out of my head. I started, writing on my own time, started writing stories. I started writing my own essays. And, it kind of, grew from there, undergrad, graduate school, all through that, it was the thing that I wanted to pursue.
What were you reading during this time? Because obviously you said this was an 8th grade assignment. You'd never read a book like The Diary of Anne Frank. Were you a reader before that, or did that spur you on to want to read a lot of different things?
I wasn't really a reader. I was a watcher of TV, to be honest. And I mean, that was the first book that I read that someone else had given to me that affected me profoundly. And I found, it's a very personal book, very human book, but also very political. It's dealing with, really big, stuff. And, in high school, I read 1984 and Brave New World and, a bunch of other books, but it was the the science fiction books, so the spec books that affected me. And then also the books that were focused on politics. They were looking at the world and asking questions about social systems, how we form and live within society. And, because those things affected me the most, I thought about that in my own writing, and it, kind of, as you can tell, it's it's everywhere within the things that I try to write.
So your passion for writing includes all those things that you pulled in. So yes, it was fiction, but really it was about society too, and our place in society and how society behaves with us. Is that correct?
Right. Right. Even before, reading The Diary of Anne Frank, I was curious about that. I always would, I was a kid that would ask my mom strange questions. It's like, so why do we do this? Or what does this mean? And it was because to me, society itself was a really strange thing. Living within a society, having all of these, having your own cultural context and then having all of these worlds outside of your cultural context. I, would watch a lot of TV with my mom as well. And so I would just ask questions about I remember seeing snow for the first time for example. I grew up in the Virgin Islands.
Right.
And so, asking what that felt like, and, how people live in those places and that sort of thing. And so being that kind of kid and reading stuff that was talking about just the world and how people live within the world, that stuff was, that was what spoke to me.
Do you have siblings, Cadwell?
Yeah, I'm the baby. So
You're the
I have
baby.
an older sister. She's the middle child, and an older brother.
Are they readers and writers or creatives in their own right?
They're artists. So my brother is a graphic designer, and so is my sister. She does more computer graphics. My brother is like he grew up drawing everything and looking at everything, and he was extremely talented. And for a while, because I looked up to him, I tried drawing, and I got decent. I was not like him at all, but yeah, both of them are artists. My mom is an artist as well, but I'm the only writer.
But it's still you're all creative, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So your writing is shaped by your worldview. And you came from really, the U.S. Virgin Islands are fairly small. They're beautiful, but very insular. When did you move and come to America? And how did that impact your worldview then?
So, when I was in high school, I was in a marching band, and we had a few marching band field trips. We would go and compete in the U.S. And so I had the opportunity of experiencing the stateside, is what we call it back home.
Sure.
Was with the USVI, in like brief stints, for a few weeks at a time. I didn't really live in the States until I was 18. I went away to college, and I lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for 4.5 years. And it was a culture shock. It's just very different, like it's starkly different. I saw snow for the first time when I was there.
I was going to say, sure.
Yeah.
And you were in a big city, which in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which I visited, it's beautiful, fabulous place, but there are no big cities because it's a small island. How did you do culturally?
Yeah, it's interesting, growing up on St. Thomas, it's only, 38 square miles.
Right.
But it felt really big to me. Like if we were taking a trip to the countryside to go visit family, it could be like an hour's drive. And to me, that felt really long. Like it felt like, this was this really big place, and going back to the Virgin Islands, especially, when I started writing about home, I realized there were so many things that I took for granted and I thought I knew that I didn't. There's a way that even small places kind of like sprawl and spread out the more you look at them.
Sure.
There's like the oldest Jewish synagogue in the Western Hemisphere is on St. Thomas, and I did not know that. It's in downtown Charlotte Amalie. But going to Pittsburgh, it felt big in a way that everything took a long time to get to. I remember taking the drive from the airport to the school, and it was 45 minutes by itself, and anywhere that I wanted to go that was outside of Pittsburgh took hours, and that blew me away. Highways blew me away. The thing that blew me away the most is language. There was things that we on St. Thomas, we have like a St. Thomian dialect. It's like a St. Thomian English. And I grew up understanding that and thinking of it as normal. And though I watched a lot of TV, it never occurred to me that the language that I was watching on TV was that different from mine. They both felt like the same thing. And I remember the first time, talking to someone and they had difficulty understanding what I was saying, and having to make that adjustment was really, a huge culture shock for me. Realizing there were certain things and mannerisms that I thought was really normal, that was outside of its context very different to other people, was also, shocking. It's a lot of that.
You live on an island that was very beautiful, very lush, very verdant. small roads, winding through the hills and everything. It's beautiful there. I love it. And here you're plunk dab in the center of a concrete jungle, essentially, which had to be geographically jarring for you as well. You've got all these highways and, road systems and crazy traffic and everything else. How did your writing become influenced by where you were living then in Pittsburgh?
That's interesting. I'm going to be honest. So I didn't start writing about home until grad school. So a lot of the things that I modeled my own fiction off of was things that I had either read or watched. And so most of my stuff was set in the States. The difference was that they were kind of like generic stateside locations. So like, like an apartment complex or the road, there was not like a sense of geography or where things were and what things look like. And I only started thinking about that stuff once I started writing about home and thinking about what home looks like and feels like, what the experience of living in a place like that is like. So my fiction, all through undergrad was very abstract, I would say. There was not a lot of concrete detail. It was a lot of people sitting in rooms talking about their feelings or their ideas.
Did you have a chance to travel to other cities in the United States while you were an undergrad?
Not really. Everything seemed so far away, and I didn't drive, so I think that, when I was an undergrad, I had a friend that lived in like a little town outside of Pittsburgh. Like it was maybe a few hours away, and he took me home once, and that was a really interesting experience. It was very rural, so it was different than seeing, living and being around a city area. It was it kind of in some ways reminded me of home, that kind of like energy of being in a small place.
A little bit more simple life rather than such an urban hustle and bustle and people moving at a fast pace all the time. Mm-hmm. How did you do with mixing with other cultures in college? Because the schools are big, and especially up there in the Northeast and in the Midwest, schools are huge, and a lot of different people go to those from all over the world. What was that experience like for you?
So I went to La Roche College, now La Roche University, and it was it's a small Catholic private college in the North Hills of Pittsburgh. So there was a couple other schools I was considering, but I chose that school specifically because it was smaller, and I thought that it was gonna be a better adjustment for me than a big school. But even with some place like La Roche University, it was the difference between having hundreds of people in my school. This is, my high school wasn't very big at all, and having like thousands of people. And so it was like even the size of a small college in Pittsburgh was like a lot for me. It was, to me, it felt massive. But La Roche was also, it had like a really good, international population. So there was people from everywhere. And that's one of the reasons I knew about it, was because a recruiter came down to the Virgin Islands and talked to us. Wow. And he sold the school. And I was like, this school sounds awesome. But, the recruiters were doing that all over. And so I met my wife there. She's from Nepal.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah. I met, I had some friends from Rwanda and Ghana and Equatorial Guinea, all through South America as well. A lot of Caribbean friends. I had a big group of Jamaican friends, and we would get into arguments all the time about our differences, because to us those things were really big. Of course. So it was a beautiful experience being around all of those different kinds of people, people that spoke multiple languages and different languages and had a whole different
customs and so on.
Yeah, customs.
Had you had that experience, that international experience on the U.S. Virgin Islands? Because it is a huge destination for cruise ships, I know. I don't know that you'd interact with tourists that much, but did you have your share of that? Or was this really kind of in your face, overwhelmingly different.
It was overwhelmingly different. To
Yeah.
me, back home, I interacted with tourists back home. My mom worked at the legislature. And that's right on waterfront. And so walking to her job after school, I had to walk through, basically, Main Street is a tourism district.
Right.
And so I would, see tourists and occasionally meet some tourists and stuff like that. But they all felt like, I hate to say it this way, generically American to me. Like
Right.
they just felt like Americans.
They were.
Right.
They were.
Most likely they all were. I think that I didn't know enough about the world to, if I met someone that was from somewhere else and they were just happening to be speaking English, I would not have known that back then. Going back home now, and going through those same walks, I will occasionally hear people with accented English. Now I know that person is visiting from someplace further afield.
Right.
We used to be the Danish Virgin Islands, so sometimes people from Denmark come and visit, and
Sure.
so there is a diversity there. I just didn't know it at the time.
Interesting. I want to talk about your serious dive into writing a book. What was your first novel? Your first novel that you wrote, maybe not had published.
Oh man, this is so embarrassing. Okay, in high school,
because something, the beginning is really just the beginning of your writing life, correct?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
You've got to make all the mistakes, and you've got to have all the failures, because that's the best kind of teacher.
Right. So, my sister read a lot of urban fiction when I was in high school. So this is just like, urban fiction is a smart way of saying, Black people with relationship problems is basically what, she would read. And because I had gotten into books and I was interested in reading more books, I started picking up some of her books. And, I remember reading a few books that I, really liked. And so early on, I tried, urban fiction stories, just stories about like, young 20-somethings dealing with life and
Like
relationships.
Stepchild, Your House Will Pay, and stuff like that. Yeah,
Right.
I got it.
And so I wrote in high school this story about this guy that was going through a breakup, but he was still friends with his ex. And that, I never finished it, but I would share it with some of my friends, and my friends really liked it. And they were like, when are you going to finish it? And I was like, soon, and just never did. And then
Why
my
do you
second
think you
book,
didn't finish? Why do you think you didn't finish?
I was in high school. I think, I just didn't have the attention span for it. I think I only developed that muscle fairly recently. I would start all kinds of big projects and have all kinds of ambitious goals for them, and then they would kind of taper off.
Maybe they weren't for you.
Yeah, maybe, looking back at it now, there wasn't enough going on in the story to keep my interest for something, for a whole book.
I see.
Yeah.
So your first published book was The Lesson?
Yes.
But you've been contributing to anthologies and literary magazines and all for quite a while now. And I know you're very, very popular. Your popularity has exploded since Lesson. So, and now you have this beautiful new book, No Gods, No Monsters. As I said earlier, one of the things that struck me about this, and you consider it a work of fantasy, and I understand why you do, but you touch on a lot of the very topical social issues of our day, and you use your world building to address those issues. Let's tell the audience a little bit about this book, please. No Gods, No Monsters.
Right. No Gods, No Monsters.
And where this came to you and why you wrote this book the way you did. So everything, this is your stage.
Okay. Yeah. A lot of why is, happy accidents, but, No Gods, No Monsters is, the way that I tend to talk about it when I'm, trying to explain it to people, because there's a lot going on in the book.
There is a lot.
But it's, the most general description of it is monsters are advocating for the human rights. It's like the civil rights era meets the modern day, but with vampires and werewolves and some, Caribbean monsters mixed in. And it's also about how, society adjusts to the idea that monsters are real, and they're coming out of the shadows, and they're trying to, find a place within the world. But it's also about like people dealing with addiction, people working through trauma. It's about big existential questions. It's about quantum mechanics for some reason. It's about finding your place in the universe and finding versions of yourself in other people, living for other people, and how do you remember people when they're gone? A lot of it is about loss. And then, a lot of it is very political. It's, because the monsters are trying to advocate for a space for themselves within the world, they're doing a lot of political action in order to try to do that.
It's a fascinating book. Your prose is exquisite. Your dialogue, oh my gosh. I don't know how long it took you to write this book, but I told you I don't normally touch on craft and everything, but I'm fascinated by the process of writing. I tell everyone, this is the God's honest truth. I can barely get an email out without having to go back and spell check and, make sure, because I just can't do it. I am in awe of people who can write books. So, did this take you a long time? So I'm going to ask you a series of questions real quick, and then you can fill it in however you want. But how did you develop this style of writing and know that you wanted to take those social and political issues and turn it into a work of fantasy? It's current urban fantasy as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the lesson took me 7 years to write, but not all of that time was writing. Big chunks of that time was avoiding the book. This one, because I had pitched it to the publisher and I had a deadline, I had no time to avoid it. So it was it took me 18 months to finish working on it. And I'm currently working on the second one, and it's new challenges and also similar challenges. But yeah, I don't know, for me, because I'm always asking questions about society, when I started thinking about, well, if monsters were real, how would they have remained hidden? I imagine that there had to be social systems in place for them to remain hidden for so long.
Yeah.
And then I also was like, well, if they're coming out into the world, how would the larger world respond to them? And so, to me, it seemed natural to look at a bunch of different people and see how each of those people would respond to this change, either within themselves, if they were, recently turned monster, or if they were, interacting with monsters now in their life, like their loved ones were monsters, or they had relationships with monsters, or they were just in proximity to this, this emergence of these preternatural beings. And because I was thinking about those questions, politics immediately came in. It to me, I usually start with the really fun idea. I'm like, oh, vampires and werewolves, that would be great, and because I love those things, I get excited about that. With the lesson, it was like, oh, I love aliens, let's do aliens. But then eventually I start asking like real world questions. And then I'm like, how does that play out in the real world? If I wanted to ground this in something that I feel like I could touch, what would that be like? And the politics come in and the themes come in that way.
It's a spectacular book. It is so magnificent. I am sure that people are going to read this. Well, I was talking to Eric Pruitt, and he said, the book is so stunning, I can't believe it. He loves it. He loves it.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah. And
thank you so much.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I have to congratulate you on such a fantastic book. When you said you're working on your next book, you're not doing a sequel, or are you doing another standalone?
So No Gods, No Monsters is the first of a trilogy. And I knew that, pretty much early on, because it's a big story I want to tell. So this is the first book. There's going to be, and I'm working on the second book right now. And the way that I've thought about it is, the first book is about the humans, the second book is about the monsters, and the third book is about the gods. The gods are hanging around in this first book, but they're not really the central focus of the first book.
Right.
So it's having those different focus points is how I'm thinking about playing out the trilogy. Plus, there's all this stuff going on underneath the story that I want to play out over the 3 books.
There are a lot of different little threads running through this book with a lot of different characters, with a lot of different POVs, which I really enjoy. Will your second book be a standalone, even if it's a sequel? Will someone be able to pick up the next book and read it and know what's going on?
That is a good question. The way that I'm working on it now, I think it's possible because there's a time jump. Each book has like a space between.
Right.
And it's filling in some of that space, but through that, you're getting to know the characters again. And so you know what, honestly, I would have to see if someone picked up the second book and they were able to follow it, then I would know for sure. But what I'm trying to do, and I'm also introducing new characters as well. So it's kind of a mixed bag. I'm not entirely sure.
But that's okay. That's part of the creative process, right? Figuring out as you go along.
Yeah.
Do you are you particularly fond of dialogue? Because it's beautiful. Your dialogue is wonderful.
I appreciate that. That is music to my ears. I agonize over dialogue. I sit with that, I wouldn't say the longest, but I feel like I can't move on until it feels right, and if I have placeholder dialogue, I know it's placeholder dialogue. It's like,
right.
If I need to set that down to move on, I'm like, I know what, it's junk, and I know I need to come back and make it feel right. I don't know, there's a lot of things that I've had to learn through studying craft. Like I read a lot of, writers that I admire, and I read them again and again to try to,
right.
to learn from them. That's my school, but dialogue is like a sense thing for me. Like I feel it when it's right. And then I can move on. And
do you think that comes from you being a big question and answer guy when you were little? You ask a lot of questions. You wanted a lot of sensory input and everything. Well, it's spectacular. It's really lovely.
Thank you.
Who's your first reader?
Oh, who I like? Do I share my work with the earliest? My wife. Yeah, she doesn't like So for this book, No Gods, No Monsters, we're reading it together now. We're actually she wanted to read it with me. And so we decided to listen to it with Dion. Dion Graham narrates the book. So we decided to do it that way. But usually she reads like an earlier draft of the thing. And as I'm working through a book, I'll have little chunks and I'll be like, here, let me read this to you, or could you read this and tell me what you think? And she's very honest, which is really great. She'll tell me I have no idea. This is frustratingly difficult for me. And then I'll go back and I'll try to rework it and make sure that
you have someone who's, reading it out loud is really important, I think, but also that you're having someone who's not giving a little stroke to you and saying, "That's fine, honey, keep going." You need to have that honesty as a jump off point. And so I think that's interesting. Whose books do you like to read? Who are you reading now?
Right now, I'm reading. I just started Dune. I just started the Dune book.
You're crazy. Trust me when I tell you, you're not gonna. You'll be so wrapped up in that book. It's gonna bleed onto your pages. It's just so hard. There's so many characters there.
Right. I think I'm gonna enjoy that because I kind of like that.
Will. I love
that ensemble cast.
I love that book. Yes, you have an ensemble going on here, a smaller one, true.
Right. It's not.
But it's important. You have a lot of characters that are interacting or overlapping, and I really like that a lot. It makes me curious as what's going to happen in the second book.
I'm finding out some of that too as I go. I'm also reading Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, and I'm loving that. I also, I just recently read Uprooted. Is that right? Is that
Uprooted is Naomi's first one.
Yeah, and it's brilliant.
I love that book.
Yeah, The Glass Hotel was something I just read recently. I had meant to go back to Emily St. John Mandel after reading Station 11, but I read Station 11 in November, and then the pandemic happened like a few months later, and it took me a while to get back to her, but I I absolutely love her work.
Do you read multiple books at once?
I do. I hop around a bit.
I do too.
Right. Yeah. I'm also reading the last novella of the Murderbot books.
Oh yeah.
And I'm also reading a lot of nonfiction because I'm doing it for research. But yeah, I hop around quite a bit. My favorite author, I need to mention this, is Ursula Le Guin, and she shows up.
Oh
She pops
yeah.
up a lot in the book.
Oh yeah. I think I have every book of hers on my science fiction shelf.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
In every possible way.
It is the world building skills are so amazing, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Really
and they always feel layers deep. It's not just here's some world building detail. It's like here's what it feels like in the bones of the characters. They're like living the world building.
A 20-layer cake that you can't wait to just go through each layer. It truly is spectacular. Yes. Right. I'm sad that I never had an opportunity to interview her. She was going to be on one of the other shows that I produce and became ill and we couldn't do the interview. So it's heartbreaking, but what a spectacular writing.
I really wanted to meet her too.
You know, I am in a book a reader group and someone said, I'm having a really hard time with Ursula's book. And I said, you have to put away all your preconceived notions and just sink into the storytelling of it all because it's so well done, don't you think?
Yeah. My favorite book from her is The Dispossessed, and that also makes an appearance in the book. And my wife was reading it, and she was having a very difficult time with it. And it's she can Le Guin is very idea rich too. She has a really great grasp of character and world and the social context, but she can be
very confusing if you're not careful. It can be very confusing. You have to be in the mindset to read her work. I agree. Whereas like Naomi Novik or Leigh Bardugo, to me, that's just pure joy. It's so joyful to read those books, regardless of what's happening. Like, we talked about Six of Crows. I mean, I was so immersed in that book that nothing was happening around me. But you really have to I think when you read science fiction, fantasy, you have to have a mindset for that too. You can't jump into it after being, a literary fiction reader and expect to understand what's going on. So
you have to have a certain tolerance for being out to sea, and Le Guin especially with her
suspending disbelief on certain things. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Cadwell, it's so lovely to talk to you today. Tell everyone where we can find you on social media, and your website we know is posted right now. It's cadwellturnbull.com. Where else are you?
Yeah, I just had a great time talking to you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that. I'm very easy to find. I have not met another Cadwell Turnbull alive. So
there you go.
All my handles are Cadwell Turnbull or Cadwell Turnbull author. So on Twitter it's Cadwell Turnbull. On Instagram it's Cadwell Turnbull author. I'm very easy to find. And my website is cadwellturnbull.com.
And it's lovely. I love your website. A lot of information on there. It's a lot of fun. The book is No Gods, No Monsters by my guest, Cadwell Turnbull. I hope you buy the book. Get the Kindle if you have to. It is a spectacular treatise in the fantasy world, but on social and political issues that are happening nowadays. It's spectacular. Congratulations on your professorship over at North Carolina. You are teaching literature and English,
creative writing fiction,
and that's going well for you. We showed a little clip of the video of you in the introduction here. I don't know if you saw it while you were scrolling up and talking to your classes. Are you enjoying being a teacher?
I am. That video was like right before I got the job. Actually, I was doing an event, and because I'm an alumni of NC State as well, and so they reached out to me and they were like, "Could we do like a little feature on you?" And I was just so grateful. And maybe a few months after that, I started going through the process of applying for the position. Then I got the letter right before the pandemic. It was like weeks. It was
wow.
Yeah. And I moved during the pandemic, and it was it's been a beautiful and surreal experience at the same time.
But what a way to come out of something. you've overcome or adapted to all the changes in your life when you went to Pittsburgh. And of course, I know you still go home and everything. You've gotten married. You've published books. You're so popular right now, and you're teaching what you love. What a wonderful life that you're doing. You're doing what you love. Not many people get the chance to say that. I wish you all the success.
Thank you so much. There's so much. I have so much gratitude. It's
That's
also
good.
just like I have to, pinch myself, and because everything feels surreal, and it's also, speaks to the times that we're in. Like there's so much that's been happening in the last few years. It's just
been a tumultuous,
a wild ride.
Yeah, it has been. It is definitely a wild ride. Cadwell Turner, thank you for being with me today. It's been my absolute joy to have you here. Please come back when the next book is out.
I will. Yes. Thank you for having me. This
Thank
was
you
great.
so much. Thank you.